Hello, listeners. Today we are kicking off a new series sponsored by our good friends at Railsware. Railsware is a leading product studio with two main focuses, services and products. They've created amazing products like Mailtrap, Coupler, and Titan apps, while also partnering with teams like Calendly and Brightbytes. They deliver amazing products and have happy customers to prove it. In this series, we are digging into the company's methods around product engineering and development. In particular, we will cover relevant topics to not only highlight their expertise, but to educate you on industry trends alongside their experience. In today's episode, we are talking with Sergiy Korolov, co-CEO of Railsware and co-founder of Mailtrap. In this conversation, we are bringing up a popular but somewhat controversial topic, vibe coding versus traditional software development approaches. Sergiy, thank you for coming back on the show. We're glad to have you. Excited to chat today, essentially around vibe coding. Really appreciate you being on Code Story again.
Thanks for having me here. I'm happy to share my opinion about this interesting topic.
Obviously, you're a seasoned tech entrepreneur. You've been in tech for over 2 decades. Is that right?
20 years. Yeah, that's correct.
Long time. You've obviously seen some big trends. You've seen things come and go. You've seen things evolve. How would you define what we're seeing now in vibe coding? And that's a term that's thrown around a lot. That's a term that is used a lot in different areas. How does that term differ from traditional software development approaches?
I honestly believe that it doesn't differ much, except that it's just yet another tool which is interesting for the community, and communities start to play with it. If we think about the major achievements by vibe coding, you will walk around in the internet and try to find some projects. You will mainly find some one-pagers or like a few pages websites with some very primitive functionality. And there are some that is stated that delivered by Lovable mostly. Lovable is just probably one of the most famous one, right? But there are a bunch of those tools at the market. So they show you some application and tell you that most of that is written by Lovable. But what is that part most? That's the question. And what it gives you, right? It gives you a possibility to write something quickly without knowledge of software development. And is it something new in the history of software development at all? Like, I would say that no, it is not. So my son, for instance, who had no experience in building software, was able to build a Flappy Bird game with Unity. So you just sit and you combine things together. You basically vibe coding, but you just drag and drop things here and there. So instead of writing text. And it was absolutely playable game. So fully created by a person who is not familiar with software development. And if we talk about WordPress, let's say, right? So you can create a web pager, like you can create some pretty advanced functionality with the set of plugins that you can install with WordPress. And there are themes that you can use. There are hundreds of them. You can purchase any and use it. So in fact, if you want to build some small web presence, a website with a few pages, some possibility to add, some purchase functionality, like a very simple one. Because what I've seen at the moment that Lovable, for instance, examples. So when you go to Reddit and search for them, there are some billing pages and billing functionality behind, but it's very simple. This is something that you can easily do again with WordPress and some plugin, like you can include Stripe and add functionality pretty quickly yourself. So making like summaries of how I see it is that it is a modern new hype tool. So I think it's overhyped, but I'm not saying that it will not lead the industry into something new. So I'm not saying this. So I consider myself as kind of rational thinker on this topic. I'm not trying to say that it's something that will not change the way how software is built, but it is not there yet for sure.
That makes sense to me. And it's interesting you point out that the vibe coding idea is not new, right? With you got drag and drop. You mentioned WordPress. You could look at maybe iPaaS tools or no-code tools and maybe a similar way where you're just putting stuff together and seeing how it feels, right? So this version of vibe coding is driven by the NLP, natural language processing approach in a chat window, right? So what drove from your perspective, what drove the emergence of this particular version of vibe coding And I'm curious if you think it's a response to development processes being rigid, or maybe the development processes that are at particular companies being rigid, or do you feel like it could be a fundamental shift in engineering? I think from your prior answer, being an engineer, I can extract some tidbits there, but I want to hear your full answer.
I guess it makes sense to separate vibe coding from the using AI tools for software development. And our team heavily uses, so we do not specifically state which tool they can use. So some uses Copilot, some of them uses Cursor as the major tool. And it's really handy. So it helps to be productive. But again, if we think about rationally, it's not like 100+% boost for every engineer as it is promised by CEOs of those companies. There are reasonable contributions. So it's something that brings completely different experience in research, because in real life software engineering, it's not about writing code. Most of the time you spend in researching the task. So you collect requirements, you cooperate with product managers on those requirements, you research what are the potential solutions to achieve the value that product manager or product leadership want to deliver to the customers. And you research some libraries, you research some architectural solutions. And this is something that LLMs do just fantastic work. So it can boost your productivity here, like exponentially for sure. Instead, and if you navigate bigger project and let's say you just join this project and you're not familiar with it, so you are able to get the knowledge about the project really quickly. So that's a fantastic tool from this perspective. Also, if we think about like old school research, it was like Stack Overflow mostly for us. And the problem with Stack Overflow was that the data very often was outdated, especially in technologies that were changing rapidly. So if you were developing something on Swift for Apple applications, so they were changing Swift pretty swiftly. And when you search for the solution, it was already outdated. And it was very complicated to describe what exactly do you want, right? So you have a complicated task. You need to imagine how this potentially can be solved at all. And on Stack Overflow, you mostly come and see simple question, simple answer. And then the bigger question, where is the source of potential solutions, like on the architectural level? And so LLMs do a very good job here. They can propose you multiple options if you need to choose, let's say, some database for a specific type of data and then querying this data. They know the documentation for databases is very extensive in the internet, and there are a lot of books and all this stuff. The context for education was pretty extensive for the LLMs. So they're quite strong in that. So research, architecture, then research within specific project. So it really knows the essentials and a lot of interesting insights that you will need to spend a bunch of hours to find those connections between the different modules and understand how kind of those entities interact with each other. So I would put aside this kind of thing that using Cursor and Copilot, it's like a pair-mate who helps you, who has more encyclopedic knowledge. And the weak point of LLMs is, of course, complicated thinking of the solution itself. So when you already need to implement, then too many factors gets into the game, which for LLMs hard to understand. You probably heard about this, or maybe you tried it yourself. So when you describe the problem you want to resolve, it creates the code, and then you want to change a smaller piece of it and start to recreate a bunch of other code pieces, which you wouldn't consider to refactor, and so on. Yeah, so that's a Cursor part. But if we talk about Lovable, then it's completely different audience, right? So it's usually people who has no software development experience, and then rapidly they're able to create at least few pages, even without knowing any tool. So just plain text and you get something. The other question is, what do you do with this something? So what is the ultimate goal? If you want to build a business around it, then you need to build a system which has versioning. So you need to update things, you need to update features, you need to update, migrate database, you need to extend functionality and so on. And this is something that already doesn't work like at all. Like literally, like you can do a few iterations, but then it changes things that you didn't plan to change. And you go in cycle back and forth until you would like to get some result and then you get it. But then you need another iteration, adding new feature, and it changes completely everything that has been built before. So I don't believe it's sustainable at the moment.
I'm glad you separated the usage of tools that help accelerate the SDLC versus pure vibe coding. And utilizing that sort of thing improves planning, improves your ability to parse complex documentation, like you mentioned, for databases. And so there's two separate things, right? And what we're primarily talking about is the vibe coding part, where you're using natural language processing for non-engineers and it's just spitting stuff out. What do your engineers think about the vibe coding side of things? And have you utilized that in Railsware to approach some of the development part of your products? Or I'm kind of curious, what's the response of that? Because obviously you talk about them using Cursor or using Copilot or the tools that fits their workflow. That's a different thing. But the vibe coding part of it itself, how are they reacting?
So engineers were skeptical, of course. This is their nature. So the major driving force of vibe coding, not an engineering community, but it's rather product oriented for people who want to consider themselves as product oriented or business oriented. So they've received some opportunity to deliver a web application, let's call it web application, without deep knowledge, or without knowledge at all of technology. And that's a very bold promise. And if you listen to those interviews of CEOs of the companies or AI companies, they promise you that things already work amazingly, that you're already able to create software and build the whole business around this software, which in fact, again, doesn't happen yet. A bunch of engineers and I myself played with different prompts trying to squeeze something. But probably like best example is that my friend and who works with me here at Railsware, designer Vlad, who is a fantastic designer himself, and he loves different tools for designing special modules, like additional third-party tools with different buttons and kind of scrollers and spinners, so he can navigate the interface of the software when he creates videos or he edits some photos. So he decided to experiment and design his own device. So he wanted to create a simulator in kind of software version of it. And he started with vibe coding tools because he's completely unaware of how software is being built from the engineering perspective. And so he spent a lot of time, really like a few days, trying to create some prompt which will bring him to some result. And so he says that it was a real pain. So you see something which looks a bit like something that you plan to have, but then you need to iteratively update it. And the changes are happening not only in that part, but also changes applied for some other parts. And again, that's the nature of LLMs, right? That they rebuild the context itself as well. And so after those few days of experiments, he decided not to proceed with vibe coding, but then he decided to start with Cursor. Again, he has zero experience in software development, but he was able to achieve at least something. So he achieved that there is an application that is installed in his iPhone and there is some wheel that you can spin. The only problem he was facing, again, because he cannot just go and fix the code itself, he was only relied on actually it's vibe coding with Cursor in his case, because he is not familiar with software, like with code itself. So he was prompting until he gets some result. And the funny story was, so he wanted to achieve that when you spin the wheel, it should make one circle. Instead, it did 10. So he explicitly asked, I need one, like it again renders the application and makes 10. He said, okay, maybe I can tell it like 10, then it will make one. He said 10, it makes 100, like and spinning. But again, at least he did some progress and he was quite inspired. But the overpromise for him played this role, a motivator to start doing something, which is a good thing, I believe. So it's because for some people, it can be a huge barrier to start at least doing something. Maybe they will understand. Yeah, let's talk about good thing here, right? So for some people, it will be just a waste of time. They will spend those $20. They will generate a bunch of applications. Let's call it applications. They will not get anything and they leave this idea behind. But for some people, it can be a motivation. They will see their first web page and they will just understand later they cannot do anything with it more. And so it potentially may push them to learn coding itself, maybe just front end part, to be able to go and change specific button or behavior of some text window or something else. Yeah, some people it can be just a first step for their education and getting more into the coding itself.
Sure. I think that's a perfect segue into my next question. And I like that you pointed that out because there are some positives to vibe coding. I think it can be presented as a split response, right? Of either vibe coding is terrible or vibe coding is the next big thing. And so I think there is some value and some applicable areas where vibe coding is useful. And you mentioned one like remove some barriers of entry for folks to jump in and create something. What that something is and where it goes next is probably the more of the consideration. What types of products or development contexts do you think are best suited for vibe coding? What's the best type of project to really jump in, or piece of a project or stage of a project to utilize true vibe coding?
That's definitely a proof of concept proof of concept. I believe that proof of concept is the best applicable thing for product managers. And this is something that we played with and sometimes it makes sense. So instead of going to Figma and creating those screens, you go just to Lovable or any other tool and you explain what you actually want to achieve. And for product managers, it can be useful because when you describe the feature, at least this is something that we do in Railsware, and this is something what we see good product managers do. They create kind of documentation around the features, right? They want to build. So it's not like a simple prompt, hey, build me a one pager or something, but they provide a lot of context. And for AI in general, the more context you provide, the better results will be. So we've experimented with it a bit. I cannot say that every feature requires this, especially when you have some interface and feature you're working on is a part of the bigger interface. Then it's hard to integrate this feature with help of vibe coding into existing UX that you have. But if it's something completely separate or just like page that is designed from scratch, with some logic behind, then vibe coding can help here pretty much.
So with that, right? So I hear you saying, I totally agree. Vibe coding can really apply to prototypes, kind of MVPs. Is it even possible then to create successful and scalable products through vibe coding? I mean, at Railsware, you guys are the experts at this, at creating successful products. You've done it many times. Scalable products, you've done it many times. But can people balance vibe coding with business requirements and deadlines and stakeholder expectations and all the things that comes from taking on a business venture? Is vibe coding enough to actually deliver?
No, I think it is not. So in a very specific case, when you have very straightforward business, I don't know, you want to sell flowers and you have 3 different packages that you want to sell, that is possible to create. You can say that there is an app, you go online and you pick the kind of type of flowers you would like to get and you get it. So this type of application you potentially may be able to deliver. But if we talk about more complicated things, like you want to build email sending service, or you want to build like a Calendly type of thing, or you want to build tool that is recording podcasts, then it's just a completely different level of software. It's just, that's the trick, right? You call application, like everything right now is called application, but I guess definition is important. So some very simple application, it is possible to build. But again, think like software which will require versioning, constant updates, iterations, improvements, development, then vibe coding is not a proper tool for this purpose for sure.
I completely agree with you there. And I think that we share a lot of the same opinions. So to wrap this up a little bit, put a bow on the conversation, vibe coding, right? We're splitting up vibe coding from Copilot type of tools for engineers. Is vibe coding actually sustainable in the long term? Or is this just a trendy reaction to over-engineering? Is this something that's going to stay? Is it something that's going to evolve? What's your opinion there?
I believe it will progress because there is a lot of money that has been already invested into that direction. So I would like to make another example. So there is Zapier, right? And there is a NA10 service. So NA10 was type of Zapier, but wasn't that popular. And then they introduced the possibility to actually vibe code with NA10. So what it literally does, it combines those blocks of automation itself when you describe what you want to achieve. So when it chooses proper blocks and connects them, this is type of the successful vibe coding. So again, because this is an application from some perspective, this is an automation. So you connect a bunch of APIs, you do certain transformations of the data that you receive from those APIs, and you post it back to two different APIs. You send emails, you create spreadsheets, you, update CRM systems and so on. So it's a fully functioning application, you can say, right? Without the interface, without front-end part. But on the back end, it works pretty well. So I think that these vibe coding tools can move towards that an abstract layer for more advanced systems, as an example that I provided here was NA10. That it just helps you to describe the problem. And again, probably next thing like WordPress vibe coding tool may appear. Because again, there are a lot of modules, there are a lot of themes. And so you can chat with it that, hey, create me a WordPress website. It creates your WordPress site. Let me this and this plugin. Let me like Shopify. Yeah, Shopify is another example, right? So you want to launch your own application, like your own service that sells something on top of Shopify. I believe it doesn't exist yet, but it will appear pretty soon, that you describe what type of online store you want to get, and Shopify will combine from the components that specific store. Yeah, that's the direction that vibe coding is. So we have one product, Coupler.io. It's analytical data integration analytic tool. So it's not vibe coding, but it's like vibe querying. We can call it this way. So you connect a bunch of connectors. And for a regular person, it's pretty hard to write an SQL query to this data and get the results. But with help of LLMs, you have possibility to interact with this data, actually having this vibe query, writing in the natural language, what do you want to achieve, what type of information you would like to get. And you will receive tables and dashboards and then make them publicly available. So you will literally have a web application that represents the dashboard. So that's type of application. Yeah. The long story short, it will go to specific services as a wrapper and will be able to build systems on top of those systems. In the end, so speaking about this successful, unsuccessful products on the Lovable, so you can go and check. There are thousands of applications are generated, but mostly community highlights. If you would put that much effort as the whole amount of people put in those successful 2 or 3 applications, that would be much more easier to do it with the standard methods. If you will accumulate all this effort that has been put in, how much money has been invested into those 3 simple apps or 4 simple apps, then it just on this scale, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Sergiy, I really appreciate you being on the show today. We share a lot of the same opinions on vibe coding, even the term. It needs to be defined of what it actually means. You have to separate vibe coding from actually using AI in traditional software development, lifecycle development with a cursor or a copilot. The latter is very useful to increase productivity, but vibe coding is good for more of the prototypes. It's good for more of the quick and dirty kind of things, or the product managers using V0 to spin up a design or something like that. But it doesn't work for full-blown projects and existing code bases, and it'll continue to get better, but it should focus on that abstraction layer so then developers can essentially take it from there. So I feel like you've highlighted a lot of really great stuff here for me and my audience. I really appreciate you being on the show and talking about vibe coding.
Thank you very much. See you next time.
Sergiy brings up fantastic points regarding the current state of AI and vibe coding. You have to separate vibe coding from utilizing an AI copilot. The former is great for prototypes, while the latter is very useful in the traditional SDLC. And there's the hope that vibe coding will get better. But for now, it should focus on the abstraction layer or domain design and have developers take it from there. Thank you for tuning in. If you would like to learn more about Railsware, please visit their website at railsware.com. That's RAILSWARE.com. And thanks again for listening.